Hey guys, once again it is extremely hot outside, and so I apologize for like the sporty clothes. I'm so hot. It is so warm in here, and I have turned off my air conditioner for this, so here we go. Today I am reviewing the sixth and what is potentially the final book in the Hidden Legacy series by Ilona Andrews. This is Ruby Fever. So I want to state just before we get started, obviously, while I will not be spoiling any of the events in Ruby Fever, I will, just by nature of trying to talk about the plot of this book, potentially be spoiling things that happen in the first 5 books of this series. So if you haven't read the series, this may not be the review you want to start with. It's always really tricky to talk about this series because while there are 6 books, really it's 2 connected trilogies. The first trilogy you could call Nevada's books. Those follow the main character, Nevada, and her romantic partner, Connor. The second set of books we'll really be focusing on today are Catalina's books. Catalina is Nevada's sister, and she has a romantic relationship with a gentleman by the name of Alessandro. We're going to focus on them. We'll return to those characters later. I don't want to go back too much to the events of Nevada's books. While some of those threads reappear, especially in Ruby Fever, they're mostly removed from Catalina's story arc. I don't want to dig too deep into the world building again because if you're here, you've already read 5 books, but this is a series aiming to wrap up everything, not just that has happened to Catalina, but some leftover threads from Nevada's books in a urban fantasy setting. Some people have magic. Their magic does different kinds of things. There are houses of magic. So, a family tends to have the same kind of magic, and they're often at war with each other in Texas, which is the setting of this series. Anyone who's read this is like, that is the worst oversimplification. I'm sorry. I'm trying to move us into the interesting part of this. If you want more, I adore this series. I'll say it up front. You should go check it out from the beginning. So after the events of the first 2 books in this series, a lot of things that have happened. One is that Catalina is now the deputy warden of Texas. This is a secret position, which basically makes her the number 2 magic user of justice in Texas, underneath someone who is very powerful politically and is also an incredibly powerful magic user who a lot of people think is just like a retired politician and kindly uncle who clearly has his fingers on like all of the buttons. No one in Catalina's very close family knows that she's doing this, so she's trying to juggle that while also continuing to lead Baylor investigations, her family's investigative business, and keep her wild family just on the rails. After a rocky start, she and Alessandro have become engaged, and Alessandro has come to basically work for Baylor Investigations after jetting around the world as a famous assassin, a life that he has mostly left behind, except for he's still trying to end the guy that murdered his father. So there's a lot of stuff just there to wrap up. That doesn't even count all of like the side things that are still going on, like Nevada being pregnant and someone going after Connor's business. There's a lot to wrap up in this book. And it begins with a bang where someone tries to assassinate the warden of Texas, aka Catalina's boss, aka the guy who holds all of the keys to all of the kingdoms and hasn't shared a lot of that with Catalina. So when he goes comatose, she has a lot to do. The other wardens of the other states aren't going to help her, and so suddenly she is the acting warden of Texas, and she has to save the world. This book struggles a little bit under the weight of what it has to do. There are so many characters in the series by this point. So for example, Augustine, who is the leader of a much more rich investigative business, like he's shown up a little bit, and weirdly you get some of his backstory in this, and he shows up. There are the Cornelius and his daughter, the animal magic users who have come to work for them, and they factor into this. There are some families left over from Nevada's series. Like, all of this has to come together, and it really is a lot. And so I think, unfortunately, while the core of these books really always has been the Baylor family, they get a little lost in the shuffle as the book tries to juggle all of the characters it's ever introduced ever and close up a lot of loose ends. It does mean also that Catalina and Alessandro's relationship kind of gets backburnered, although at this point they are engaged, and so there's really not as much there. There is some stuff for them with Alessandro's family, which you learn even more in this book is more messed up than you thought it was. But like, it's not really like relationship building stuff. They just are together against the world, which is great. But if you want more of the romance that I think makes these series really great, there's just not as much of that in here because it can't fit. The other thing that I found incredibly frustrating about this book is that Nevada and Connor are so overpowered in terms of both their monetary power, the power of Rogan's business, and also their magical power, that they basically have to be taken out of the picture for most of this book. And really interesting and wild things are happening to them. I mean, Nevada's pregnant, someone's coming after Connor's business. But on the one hand, I was like, do we not get to see any of this? Like, it's all happening off screen, right? And then as Catalina and the rest of the family come up to these things that Nevada and or Connor could have fixed like that, it just starts to feel like, okay, you've clearly just removed them for the sake of removing them until, the end when everything comes together. So that was a little bit frustrating, and I know that at this point there's no other choice because this is Catalina's story, but that did feel a little heavy-handed and I was not as much of a fan. With that being said, this series does a lot with novellas or deleted scenes or extra stories, and as someone who's never read any of those, I did feel like there were huge chunks of this story that people were referencing, particularly things that Arabella, the youngest sister, does, which have been released as novellas or extra stories that are referenced, and they're meant to be jokes, but I just felt like I was being left out of the circle of insider knowledge, and was just, again, more stuff that affected this plot happening off screen. So between that and what was happening with Nevada and Connor, that felt really frustrating. And it's not like it could fit, right? There's so much going on in this book. Like, I haven't even talked about the random Russian royalty that shows up and puts a wrench in everyone's plans. Like, part of that is because it quickly gets into spoiler territory there, but like, there's a lot going on, right? There are assassins and people trying to take over the world and multiple people trying to kill Catalina, and so much family drama in the Baylor family that you did not think would happen that comes out at the end. Like, guys, there's just so much. And yet I still felt frustrated that so much of it happened off screen. As an action-packed final book, I think it does a really great job of tying off loose ends that you didn't even know existed. And in fact, in some situations, I felt like they were tied off a little bit too neatly. I understand that while this book is clearly setting up a story for Arabella, as I understand it, Ilona Andrews, which is actually a team of writers, a husband and wife, have broken with traditional publishing. And so while they seem to be hinting at stories for Arabella, I don't know if we'll get them. And so maybe their thought was, well, we don't know if we'll write that either, so we'll tie off a lot of this right here and reveal some secrets. So I don't know if that was also part of the overloaded nature of this, that they didn't know if they would have a chance to tell some of this backstory they've been hiding from us. As readers of this series, I feel like we should be aware of that before we go into it, because I got very excited and I was like, oh, they're clearly setting up something with Arabella here, but now I know that we might not get it, and I kind of wish that I had known that going into that. But again, it helps make the overloaded nature of this book make a little bit more sense. to me, this entire series has been a little bit more uneven than Nevada's books. I felt that the first book of Catalina's story came out really, really strong in resetting and continuing the series at the same time. I did not like the middle book as much. I did not like how much of, again, Alessandro's character development happened off screen, and then he came back and he was like, I'm totally different now. And I was like, okay, but couldn't you have done that character growth together? That's been a recurring problem throughout this series. And again, having to remove, for all three books really, Nevada and Connor from the equation because they're so overpowered. With all that being said, I really do love this series. I think I'm not an urban fantasy reader much myself. This one is definitely, up until this book, much stronger with the romance aspect than some other urban fantasy that I have read. So if you love romance novels and you love fantasy and you love action and you love strong families and women that kick butt, and also men, but the main characters are women, so you know, it really ticks all of those boxes. I just feel in some of the plotting has been uneven, but if that doesn't bother you the way that it bothers me, you can ignore me. The main thing is that even with its ups and downs, I think that this was a great way to close out this series. Whether or not we get more in it, I hope we do, but if we don't, I think this was a fantastic finale. I reread Catalina's books in preparation to read the last book, and now I think I'll go back and I'll read Nevada's again as well, because they are not only worth reading, they're worth rereading. So thank you to the husband and wife team behind Ilona Andrews for this wonderful adventure. I feel like I haven't read anything else quite like this series, and if you have any recommendations for a similar series for me to go to next, I'll happily take that. So you can put that down in the comments below if you want. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!